to the second in our series of Lent lectures, where I hope you've had plenty to eat.
Thank you.
We are very pleased to welcome Ava. So I've got all this written down here because Ava is involved with so many things. This is just some of them, I'm sure, but co-founder and CEO of the Centre for Democracy and Peace Building, based in Belfast. Curates the TEDx Stormont and is advisor to Rising Global Peace Forum in Coventry and Director of Public Affairs at the Centre for the Resolution of Intractable Conflict at Harris Manchester College, Oxford. And I'm sure there is a long list of other things as well. Yeah. But you get the idea that Ava has been very much involved in things to negotiate peace and resolve conflict. And today is St. Patrick's Day, and she is going to be reflecting a little bit on the peace-building process in Ireland. And we're really delighted that you've been able to come and join us here, Ava. And the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So normally I sit in the audience and Lord Alderdice is speaking, so I'm under no pressure at all, but I will do my best. So John asked me to come here today and speak to you a little bit about my own experiences. And as you can hear from my accent, I'm not Irish, I'm actually Polish. So it's quite remarkable to be celebrating St. Patrick's Day here in this beautiful English parish. With Polish women standing here in front of you. So I think that we can all agree that it's quite easy to be overwhelmed at the moment with what is happening in Ukraine. And it feels particularly raw and real and relevant to us in Poland. And I was born in Poland, so were my parents, but my father was born in Galicia, which is now modern-day Ukraine. My mom was born in Poland, but in Novogródek, which is now modern-day Belarus. I've got family members in Western Ukraine. I've got family members in Russia. I've got family members in Belarus. I've got family members in Austria and Germany. So as you can imagine, it is quite exhausting to be Polish. We are stuck somewhere between the Western, Latin West, and Orthodox East. We are stuck between northern Protestant countries and the southern Catholic countries and constantly trying to find our identity. And as Lord Alderdice would say, it very much reflects on our way of being in the world. And I think that the response of Polish people to the current crisis in Ukraine very much reflects that. Our hearts are aching, and we know how it feels to be stuck somewhere in between big, massive powers. So I arrived in London when I was just 19 for 2 weeks holiday, over more than 20 years ago, and I'm still here. One thing led to another, and I ended up going to Belfast and trying and being involved in peace-building work, which I never thought I would. I study maths and physics, I study economics and marketing, and I didn't think that I will find myself one day working on the Northern Irish peace process and working with one of the architects of the Irish peace process. As I said before, it's very easy to be overwhelmed at the moment. So last Saturday, in order not to watch the news and to get a little bit of breathing space, I decided to go to Saatchi Gallery to see an exhibition, just to take a few hours off. I'm not sure if it was such a great idea because I went to see an exhibition called Crisis in America. And it was a series of really powerful photographs by Magnum photographers. The first series was taken in 1969, and the second series was taken in recent years. And it covered different subjects from social justice to poverty to gun laws and so on. When I left the gallery, I felt quite overwhelmed. I sat on the stairs of such a gallery and started texting a friend of mine who is currently at Harvard. I said, Sinead, I just seen this exhibition, and it's just so heartbreaking because what is happening in the world, and reflecting on what I just seen is, are we going backwards or are we moving forward? And I felt quite unnerved, and Sinead is currently in States and felt the same, and I started reflecting, what about peace building? What about trying to drive change? And as I was sitting, pondering on it, my phone rang. And it was unknown number. I answered the phone, and on the other end of the phone there was this girl and a young woman, and she says, "Hi, Eva. My name is my name is Dina. I'm not sure if you remember me." And I couldn't actually, but she started talking, and the penny started dropping, and she says, "I was just going through some boxes and find your note. I just wanted to say thank you. You helped me 17 years ago." And then I remember it was a young girl, Pakistani girl, who was running away from arranged marriage. At the time, I was still working in the private sector, and my business partner gave her a job. I put her up in my spare room for a little while, and I didn't even remember her. And whenever she called me and she said, "Eva, now I've got a 17-year-old son, life worked out for me, and I wanted to say thank you because you were so important for me at the time. You were not intrusive. You provided shelter." And whenever, it really put a smile on my face because I realized that you don't have to run a big, NGO or a small NGO, as Center for Democracy is. You don't have to call yourself peace builder, but in every daily encounter we can be a peace builders. And, this takes me to the first lesson of my peace building experience, which is the power of acknowledgement. How important it is to acknowledge people in our lives who help us along the way. And sometimes how important it is for others to hear this message. So perhaps for this week, your little task would be think of somebody who helped you out maybe yesterday, maybe last year, or maybe 10 years ago, and thank them because they may need this. My second lesson of peace building and Northern Ireland is humility, especially humility in relation to those who are different than us. So I still worked in the private sector. I was driving my car in Belfast and listening to the local news, and it was shortly after Poland joined EU. And there was quite a horrific report of Polish men being beaten with baseball bats by the local community, ex-paramilitaries or paramilitary members in South Belfast. Basically, as a result of borders opening up, Poles arrived in Belfast, moved into mainly loyalist areas. The community felt quite unsettled, and basically they were visited by some paramilitary men. I felt a great sense of responsibility because whenever I arrived in Northern Ireland, there was maybe a dozen Poles. At that time, whenever this report was on, there was 35,000 people. So the community felt quite overwhelmed. I picked up the phone and called the local police station in Donegal Road, and I said to the inspector, "Listen, I'm Polish, I understand the culture, I'm starting to understand a little bit of the Northern Irish situation, and I'm willing to help." And he welcomed me with open arms and said, "Eva, we're actually meeting local community in their community center, and I would be grateful if you can come in." So I went to the meeting, and in one room there were local residents, in another room there was police, there was few grumpy civil servants, and there was me, and I had very little experience, and I started engaging and talking to people, and we realized that those young Polish men were brought to Belfast, and they were working for about £2 per hour. They were building a motorway, the employers put them in the houses in the local community, overcrowded, they were drinking, and people just felt unsettled. So we actually had to contact housing executive and labor relation agency and sort out a few practical things at the same time, we had to engage with a community which was very, very vulnerable, and it was predominantly working class loyalist community. And the 12th of July celebrations were approaching, so it's a marching season in Northern Ireland, and one of the local community members said, Eva, why don't you come to our 11th of July party, which quite often is hostile and is perceived as something what most of the people in Northern Ireland would go for 2 weeks holiday during the marching season. I said yes, and I took a few friends of mine, and we went to Sandy Road, to the local community. 3 Range Rovers arrived as well, because the police service of Northern Ireland felt that I needed protection. And we went into the community center, and we were welcomed by an older lady who was wearing a T-shirt with the photograph of John Paul II, and you can only imagine the Polish, devotion to our beloved Pope, and with a slogan, F, the Pope. So, this was my lesson of humility. I just looked at her, and I thought, those people here are mad, they properly, But I smiled, I didn't say anything, I ignored the T-shirt. And we had the best day ever. We were fed with sandwiches and sausage rolls and, tray bakes and numerous cups of tea, and the local community took us to show off their murals and things. The kids were playing, the bonfire was about to start, and we had to leave beforehand because it was too dangerous. So a few weeks later, the local inspector called me and said, Eva, I don't know what you did to those people or what you said, but they're putting Polish classes in the local community center. They're organizing welcome mornings for the local Polish community, and there was no more attacks. So, it was a lesson of humility, of, reaching out to others who are different as us, because a lot of people in Northern Ireland, and John now, would not go into 11th of July party. They would, consider it it's not something you do. So sometimes, this act of reaching out and, acknowledging others and their cultures, their, and hopefully this lady is not wearing the T-shirt anymore, by the way. And the third lesson is the lesson about importance of freedom of heart. So shortly after my involvement in Sandy Row, in the Loyalist area, I was asked by the Office of First and Deputy First Minister in Northern Ireland and the police service to set up a campaign, because unfortunately Belfast became a hate crime capital of Europe. Every day there were reports of attacks, of hate crime attacks and incidents across the province. So I set up Unite Against Hate campaign, and it became a massive success, and we did quite a lot of work with John, with music and sport, and reaching out to, again, communities, hard-to-reach communities. The campaign won a Policing in the Community award, not only in Northern Ireland, but also for the whole of UK. And we received a bursary for 2 of the other colleagues who ran the campaign. I was basically working as a consultant with the police service of Northern Ireland. And we received the bursary, and one of the inspectors called me and said, Eva, we actually have to spend the money before end of the financial year, so would you like to, for instance, go to Glasgow? Perhaps we can learn something from the exchange. And I said to Jeremy, no, I think maybe, there is enough resource in the place. Why don't we go to the US? So I picked up the phone and called the US consulate in Belfast, and I said, look, we've got a little bit of funding. We would like to go and perhaps exchange some of the lessons. And one thing led to another, and 11 years ago, today, I was basically drinking excessive amounts of champagne in the White House. I never had any expectation or anything. The US consul, she was a wonderful Indian woman who really wanted to try to move Northern Ireland forward, basically picked up the phone and called Chief Constable and said, Matt, you were you were at the White House last year, this year, you are not getting an invitation because we are sending Eva and 2 other police officers. And he says, fine, as long as the force is represented. And I wasn't even a part of the police service. So, this wasn't even enough. In the morning, as some of you may know, at the moment in Washington, there would be a lot of Irish dignitaries and people from across different communities, and there are numerous events and celebrations for St. Patrick's Day. And in the morning, there was a breakfast hosted by Northern Ireland Bureau, and the same Consul General called me and said, Eva, come here. And she said, by the way, you will be meeting President Obama face to face and together with the other 2 guys. And it was a really special moment because I was there, a Polish girl with 2 uniform officers. One was actually a PSNI, Police Service of Northern Ireland. The other guy was from Garda Síochána, from the Republic of Ireland. For the very first time, there was somebody on exchange, and me in the middle between them, marching into the White House and having a really special moment. And I think that I wouldn't be in the White House, or I wouldn't get there, if it wasn't for the freedom of heart, if it wasn't for the fact that, I was open enough to, just do what I could with what at the time, I think the U.S. consul was getting really fed up because a lot of people would be calling her and demanding tickets and, being on the invitation, while I approached that, Glasgow or Washington, so not that I wouldn't like to go to Glasgow. So I think those are basically the 3 lessons which I talk about before tonight's talks, that, through the journey of peace building, of course, over the last 15 years, I learned a lot, and there were still things which frustrate me greatly about Northern Ireland, about the world, and about things and injustices which are happening every day. But, having the power of acknowledgement and remembering that we can build peace and do something significant every day with our everyday encounters. The second thing is having the humility, and I think Lord Allardyce recently quotes one of his psychologist friends of, what my opponent is right about. Trying to learn from those who are very, very different to us, and perhaps sometimes even people which we find difficult to tolerate. And the first lesson of the freedom of heart and being open and follow the little voice inside our hearts and where the altar is. But, being open enough to be led and not having everything pre-planned. And since it's St. Patrick's Day, I wanted to leave you with a little Irish blessing, and I will be very happy to have a conversation with you afterwards. So I sing this morning, which is a slightly different blessing that usual, that may the roof above us never fall in, and may we friends gather below never fall out. So I leave you with this. Thank you.
So we can continue this conversation. Do you have things that you would like to ask Eva? I'm sure you do. What comments? Just throw in.
Well, firstly, it sounds like it's not a miracle that you're actually still here, with what you've been through in Northern Ireland. But that basic level of consideration, how do you start? When they did, paramilitaries just didn't have a good day and decided to stop their baseball bat beat, and something happened that broke that cycle. Perhaps you identify key community leaders, or where do you start that process?
You start with reaching out, you start with simple conversations, and something what I definitely learned over the last number of years is patience. That, realizing that we are only one piece of a puzzle in much bigger picture, and it will not be a one conversation or one community. It's like this constant, relentless, reaching out, having conversation, and this visit to the local community center, we didn't engage with any paramilitaries or any men. It was mainly women and children. It was, party during the day. But, in following years, once you start developing trust and relationships, we took a lot of young men for instance, to Poland, to Auschwitz. And I seen them crying their eyes off. Like, literally, there are no attacks against Polish people in Northern Ireland, especially in the loyalist communities, because, like, we try to find some things which we had in common. And for them, what spoke to them is Polish involvement during the Second World War. So, we talk about the Battle of Britain, and a colleague of mine in Belfast developed this amazing program looking at the pilots, and because they actually, after Battle of Britain, they were stationed in Northern Ireland in Ballyhalbert. So trying to find things which bring us together, those common threats, because on the end of the day, even encounter with this older woman in Belfast was, we shared a cup of tea, we shared a tray bake. We started talking on a human level. We did not discuss a big, concepts of peace building, or we were not trying to sign Good Friday Agreement. We were trying just to be human and share this shared sense of humanity. And even our recent work with Lord Alderdice, with loyalist flute bands, we reached out to them and met them where we're at. They, they cherish what they do. They cherish their, they meet every week. They've got their own, orange halls and community centers. They rehearse, and regardless how sometimes it may be perceived, a lot of people in Northern Ireland will perceive those loyalist flute bands as really bigoted. We looked at them as, as members of the society who cherish and share something together. And after a number of projects, they were actually invited to perform in Belfast City Hall during St. Patrick's Day by the Irish government, which again, even people, I don't know, John, if you remember, even people who were attending this reception were shocked, because it was, pushing the boundaries too far to those who would consider themselves quite often peace builders. So it's, it's one conversation at a time, but also having the humility and realizing that, unfortunately, it will be hundreds of those conversations.
I think many of us are rather despairing of politicians now, and what you've been saying suggests to me that working from the bottom up rather than top down may actually achieve better results.
I think that it's absolutely, so on one hand, yes, it's very labor intensive and we have to work on the bottom and go up, but it's also important to engage on the top and work down. So after the Unite Against Hate campaign, I actually spent a number of years working at the Northern Ireland Assembly on a capacity building program for the elected members. So, and I did, even now, we run a fellowship program, and we bring actually mid-career political and civic leaders to Oxford. We will be back in September. Maybe I should bring them here for a little break. So I think it has to work both ways. In recent, probably since I moved back to London, because I spent 15 years working and living in Belfast, and I thought I need to give it a rest. And since I moved to London, I probably work more top down than bottom up because of distance and so on. And I thought what is my gift to the future, and what can I do, and how best can I invest my time and limited resources. It's why we set up the fellowship program for political and civic leaders, and we are trying to address some of the issues on the top. Because what I did find out quite often, those sort of on the community level, sometimes it's much easier to, and they're moving forward slightly quicker sometimes than those who are entrenched in their positions higher up.
I first worked in Poland in the late 80s, and it was very different. Poland, very grey, very Russian dominated, of course. But one of the things that struck me about supported an organisation called ISA, which is for young business management students in universities. And despite the repression which Poland had under the Russian, the young people had this amazing belief and enthusiasm that the future was going to be better and that they would be driving it. And I found that a little conflicting with some of the elder members of the communities who almost like were in an acceptance of the situation, perhaps because they'd taken it so long. But I found that the young people's approach was very possible. I think it's right. If you can get that message that these conflicts can be resolved, these situations can be solved in the future, then that can take it through. Whether you feel the same from your experiences there?
Yeah, probably yes. I'm actually from Silesia, so not too far from Katowice, and I went to Academy of Economics before I went for my extended holiday in London. Yes, I think that there was always a zest, and Poles are quite resilient. You have to remember we were wiped out of the map of Europe for 123 years, yet the Polish language, Polish culture remained, and it was carried from generation to generation, quite often by this youthful zest, and with older people, and to some extent, like we've been talking earlier about what is happening in Russia, and imagine the conflict which is going inside the country right now, between the old and the young, and people who perhaps are exhausted from from what is happening around them, and it was similar in Poland that after Poland regained its independence in 1918 and enjoyed the country sort of getting on its feet, and then September 39. Quite often witnessing what is happening in Ukraine, I can only imagine how people felt in Poland in September 39, first being attacked on the 1st of September, the Germans, and 17th of September by the Russians, and stuck and without any help, and all the empty promises, and and sort of bearing it. And so after the war, again a massive disappointment. Like how many people sort of tough and were heartbroken because we became part of the sort of Eastern Bloc, and by the time you got to the 80s, those people probably had enough, like they just wanted a better future for their children. And even reflecting on my own family, my parents and, grandparents, what they went through, the trauma, which they did not want to pass to the next generation. So, it was for the next, for those born in, 60s and 70s to pick up the baton and go on and create a better Poland, which is now. And probably for the first time in many years, I feel truly proud of being Polish. And it's not only whenever I'm landing in France to go skiing and I don't have to queue because I've got European passport, but also, after recent years and our government perhaps not representing us as we would love to, or creating image of Poland. In the last 2 weeks, really the Polish spirit rekindled, and the kindness and the love and the compassion won. So I'm really, really proud how Poland is and Polish people are reacting right now.
Eva, I wonder if I might ask you, when people think about religion and religious faith in the context of situations of conflict, they very often feel negatively about religion and faith. And in Northern Ireland, for example, they look at it and say, well, these Protestants and Catholics are fighting with each other and so on. One of the things that has really struck me about Poland is that it was the church and people's commitment to it that actually helped sustain them. And then when things emerged with solidarity, there was a profound spiritual dimension to that. Outside, the political commentators talked about it in terms of trade union, in terms of political change, and all of those guys. It was absolutely true. But there was also a spiritual dimension to it, and it wasn't just because you had a Polish Pope who came and kissed the ground and all these kinds of things. There was something in there, and I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, both in terms of Poland, your homeland, which you love very much, but also of your experience in Northern Ireland, often seen as a negative for religion and faith.
I start with Northern Ireland. So when I first arrived in Belfast, as I said, I was working in the private sector. I drove nice sports car. I packed my surfboard, and I was driving to the west coast of Ireland for a surfing trip, and I drove through County Fermanagh. And as I drove, I kept noticing on the farms those massive signs, all about sin and dying. And, I was like, those people are mental. Like, what's wrong? And at the time, I was going to a really nice Polish parish in London, lots of singing, and like really happy and, lovely approach to faith and religion. And I arrived in Northern Ireland, and I was overwhelmed by how the experience of God or faith, that it's so gloomy and so heavy. And of course we have to acknowledge, all aspects of our being, but it's something what struck me. And even within the Catholic Church in Ireland, it was always this doom and and heaviness, and it's almost like one forgotten about probably the primary sort of message of compassion and love, which guided me and continues to guide me. That on the end of the day, yes, even through sin, and all the messages on those farms and and churches can be only won through compassion and outreach. So I think that the religion, and you are correct, played completely different role in Eastern Europe, especially in Poland, because the communist regime was unable